Shalom, shalom, Kodashim. Bless you, bless you. Thanks for joining me today. We are looking at the Saturday Sabbath. Is it Saturn's day? If you haven't had a chance yet, go check out my previous video on the book of Amos and the false feast that Yahuwah hates. I highly recommend you watching that first. It's all about the context of Amos and about the northern tribes of the house of Israel being led astray by the practices of Jeroboam, who made offerings and sacrifices in Samaria to 2 golden calves, and changing Yahuwah's Sukkot, his 7th month, to the 8th month. Now, if any of you have been around long enough, you've probably been introduced to the argument that Saturday is actually Saturn's day, and anyone keeping the Sabbath on Saturday is following Saturn. People like to accuse others for following Babylon if they keep a 7th-day Saturday Sabbath. My position is that the 7th-day Sabbath cycle should remain unbroken as scriptures prescribe. So if your calendar breaks that cycle, I feel personally that there are issues with that. If you have a Sabbath every 7 days and it's on a Saturday, 364 days later, at the last day of the year, you're going to be on Saturday. So that's not a Babylonian calendar, as they like to accuse you of. And the irony is not lost on me either, that some of the people who promote this Saturn day condemnation were doing their Sabbath on Saturday last year, and this year they are partaking it on Sunday. So by their own argument, that would mean they followed Saturn too. And now this year they're following Sol Invictus, the Sunday. So let's spare everyone the hypocrisy. Let's come together and really think this through. Now, there is some partial truth to the argument, but it's somewhat backwards. It's somewhat of a false equivalency fallacy. Saturn's day Saturday was named after the Sabbath, not the other way around. Israel didn't change the day, they changed the deity that presided over the day. The northern tribes of Israel did change a feast to a different month, however, which is the 8th month, as shown in that previous video. Now, words come from words, and it should be obvious to anyone with 2 eyes that the word Saturday is linguistically connected to Saturn. In Greek mythology, Saturn is actually Kronos, the Titan father of Zeus. The word is connected to sowing. It's believed that because Saturn is a distant wandering star, it was a slow mover. It was seen as being at rest. And we can see that the name for the sun in Hebrew, Shemesh, well, it just also happens to be tied to a deity, Shamash. So Saturn, the derivation from Latin serir, past participle satus, to sow, is said to be folk etymology. The current Hebrew name of Saturn is Shabtai, and can easily hear the allusion to Shabbat. Again, the sun, called Shemesh in Hebrew, Shams in Arabic. The similarity is obvious, and it goes back even to Mesopotamian mythology, where Shamash is the sun god, the hot one. And then Jupiter, the Hebrew name for Jupiter is Tzedek, usually meaning justice. And in the Hebrew scriptures, Jupiter is actually called by the Romans in scriptures in Acts 14:12 is actually Zeus to the Greeks. So names come from names. And I think most biblical sleuths are familiar with Constantine and the Roman Catholic Church declaring Sunday, the day of the sun, to be the Lord's day, and changing the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. In 1582, Pope Gregory's Gregorian calendar skipped 10 days to the calendar, taking us from Thursday the 4th to Friday the 15th. So the numerical date was changed, but the sequence of days was never broken from the weekly Sabbath. This change was an effort to correct the 365-day Julian calendar, which had progressively added days over time. And at one point, the Romans, prior to them adopting the planetary system, the Romans had an 8-day week that had letters A through H attributed to them. And eventually they are the ones who adopted a 7-day week, and it wasn't until late BC and early CE that they started utilizing the planetary bodies as names, adopting them from the Babylonian system. The Roman planetary week, with its astrological function, eventually merged with the Jewish 7-day week, and its widespread adoption in the Roman Empire was further solidified with the Christianization of the week of the 4th century CE under Emperor Constantine, who established Sunday as a day of rest. The point is, Rome adopted the 7-day Sabbath cycle and didn't even solidify the planetary names until Constantine's time. They're the ones who called the 7-day Sabbath Saturn, not the other way around. Just because somebody calls something holy unholy by an unholy name does not make that thing unholy. That's a false equivalence. And I'll list some resources at the end of this video where history shows them calling the so-called Jewish 7-day Sabbath Saturn. But where does this idea come from in scriptures? That the Jews worship Saturn, and therefore Sabbath is Saturn's day. Where does that idea come from? Well, it's speculated from the book of Amos. Amos 5:25 through 26. Have you offered unto me sacrifices and offerings in the wilderness 40 years, O house of Israel? But ye have lifted the tabernacle, the Succoth of your Moloch, and Kiun, your images, the star of your Elohim, which you made to yourselves. So the scope and context here is of most importance. Amos alludes to the wilderness at the time of the Exodus and mentions the tabernacles, or better yet, the Succoth, the tents of your Moloch. See, the Israelites were commanded to keep the 7th month festival of Sukkot in the Sukkahs. In the book of Acts, Stephen references this verse and calls the star Remphan rather than Kiun, which I believe to be very significant here. And here, Brown, Driver, and Briggs says, probably a statue of a Syrian Babylonian of the planet Saturn, and used to symbolize Israelite apostasy. It's probably what it means, but not sure, right? According to AI, scholars widely agree that this deity, Kiun or Remphan, refers to the planet Saturn, particularly in its Assyrian name, Kayenu or Kiwan. Ancient Mesopotamian and other cultures associated deities with celestial bodies, and Saturn was often seen as a significant star god. In Persian literature, in the geocentric model, Saturn was on the highest planetary sphere, the 7th, as a result of Persian poetry. Kayvan usually connotes physical elevation and exalted status. So Saturn is tied to the 7th. This word Kiun, spelled with a kaf, is only used once in the Bible, and scholars actually don't agree with its meaning. It's a very obscure word, and even if it does mean Saturn, we can see that the Persians, connected it to the 7th. And I'd like to propose a different interpretation, and we're going to use scope and context to get an understanding of what Amos is actually talking about regarding the time in the wilderness. Now, you may have heard of the idea that the Star of Kiun or Remphan is actually a 6-pointed star that Israel has on their flag. That the Star of Remphan is corresponding to Saturn's hexagon. You know, they're going to put a hex on you, right? Well, we can see the nod to Saturn with the ringed hat called the Saturno, worn by Catholic priests, and it's postulated that this is why judges wear black robes, as they are priests of Saturn. But is there any possibility that Israel's flag star represents the star rising out of Jacob instead, and completely unrelated to Saturn? Well, I'll digress on that. But let's continue. Maybe this word Kyun, maybe it does mean Saturn, but even if it is, it doesn't mean anything different. But have scholars ever been wrong? You'll notice that it says the tabernacle of Malakim in the Hebrew, ending in the Kaf Mem. This is plural masculine. Molech is also the Hebrew word for king, Mem, Lamed, Kaf. And this is in the positive plural form and could mean your kings, plural. Now I'm going to show why I think this is actually referring to the kings of Canaan, Kaf, Nun, Ayin, Nun, Yod. And the Kyun mentioned here are actually the Rephaim, often translated as giants of the land of that Israel was giving their daughters to, those giants of wickedness. And I'll show how the star of Kyun is actually an 8-pointed star, and lifting up the star really just means they were integrated with the Canaanites. It may not even have anything to do with a particular star. Now you're probably familiar with the story of the Rapha, the giants, in relation to King Og of Bashan, out of the land of Ashtaroth, the land of Rapha, giants. This context is connected. Acts 7:43, Stephen says, "Yea, ye took up the tabernacle of Moloch, the star of your Elohim, Remphan, figures which ye made to worship them, and I will carry you away beyond Babel." And we see this in Amos 5:26, this word Raphan, if you look at it in the Greek Septuagint. The Greek word where Kyun is used in the Old Testament Greek Septuagint is the word Raphan, which is translated as Remphan or Raphan and is referenced by Stephen in Acts. So Stephen is pointing to Amos, who's pointing to Moses and those who rejected the Torah and Moses during the Exodus in the wilderness. Those people died, but the faithful remnant cut covenants and continued keeping the Torah afterwards. Most of the New Testament utilizes the Old Testament Septuagint and is an older text than most Hebrew texts we have today. So in the mind of Stephen, he was referencing the Raphan, and we'll see who that is in a moment. I believe there's a chance that this ambiguous Hebrew word Kyun is some kind of derivative of Canaan, the Kaf Nun. In Leviticus 18, Yahuwah warns Israel against doing after the lands of Egypt and Canaan. In that chapter, he is forbidding incestual relationships, adultery, homosexuality, bestiality, and the passing of their seed to Moloch. 18 verse 3, "You shall not do as they do in the land of Egypt, where you lived, and you shall not do as they do in the land of Canaan, to which I am bringing you. You shall not walk in their statutes." Leviticus 18:21, "And you shall not let any of your seed pass through to Moloch, neither shall you profane the name of your Elohim. I am Yahuwah." As you can see, the word Moloch is the same Hebrew word Melech, translated king. I believe passing the seed to Melech could be understood as giving your children to the king so that he can have his way with them, and or engaging in intermarriages with the kings of the nations to gain influence and power. This happened after the Exodus as described in Numbers 25, when Israel fornicated in the tents in the Sukkoths with the Moabites, which are Canaanites. We see sometimes that the nations and their kings are referred to as the Raphan. This is clear in the Greek versions of our Bibles. In Deuteronomy chapter 2 in the King James, the Moabites lived in the territory where the giants, the Rephaim, were. Deuteronomy 2:9 through 11. "And Yahuwah said unto me, Distress not the Moabites, Neither contend with them in battle, for I will not give thee of their land for a possession, because I have given Ar unto the children of Lot for a possession. The Emims dwelt therein times past, a great people and many and tall as the Anakims, which also were accounted as giants, Raphaim, as the Anakims, but the Moabites call them Emims. And in Deuteronomy 2:11, this is the Greek word Rephaim, that they translate giants, the Raphaim, the Rephaim. So where the Greek version describes them as the Rephaim, as postulated by Stephen, the book of Enoch considers the Rephaim as the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim giants in Genesis 6, what we call devil spirits. Deuteronomy 3:11. For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of the giants, the Rephaim. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. It is not of Rabbath of the children of Ammon. 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth thereof, after the cubit of a man. Joshua 12:4. And the coast of Og, king Melech of Bashan, which was of the remnant of giants, the Rephaim, that dwelt at Ashtaroth and at Edrei. These so-called giants, the Rephaim, who are Canaanites, dwelt at Ashtaroth. So what we're doing is we're building scope and context here so that we can see and understand the reference of what Amos is talking about, those 40 years in the wilderness, and why Stephen said Rephaim. Let's take a step back and get some scope and context on the book of Amos. Look at the context of what's being said. Yah asked if they were making sacrifices and offerings to him or someone else while they were in the wilderness for 40 years. After the Exodus, some of the children of Israel had been led astray by the mixed multitude, who ended up fashioning a golden calf, who said, "This is Yahuwah who brought you out of Egypt." It's said that out of all the original men who had been numbered that left Egypt, only Joshua and Caleb made it to the promised land. If you fast forward to the time of King Solomon, Israel was divided into 2 kingdoms. Solomon had set up images in the temple for other deities, namely Ashtaroth. After the kingdom of Israel split, the northern 10 tribes were called the house of Israel, and they worshipped in Samaria. And Judah and Benjamin, kind of mixed in with Levi, made up the southern tribe called the house of Judah. If you saw from my previous video, I showed how Jeroboam took 2 golden calves and said the same thing at the Exodus, saying, "This is your Elohim that led you out of Egypt." He then makes his own feast day on the 8th month, and this is the feast that Yahuwah hates, because it's of Jeroboam's own invention. They were drawing near and adopting false Sabbaths on the 8th month, not necessarily anything to do with the 7th day. A predominant fixture in the Bible story of idolatrous worship alongside of Baal is his consort Ashtaroth, also called Asherah, known as Ishtar in Assyria and Astarte by the Greeks and Romans. Ashtaroth literally means star. Ashtaroth is considered to be the queen of heavens, mentioned in Jeremiah chapter 7 and 44, where Judah is asked if Yah commanded them to make offerings and sacrifices in the same way when he brought them out of Egypt. They were making fires, baking cakes, and pouring out drink offerings to the stars, the Ashtaroth of heaven. These are the feasts that Yahuwah hates. He did not command them. He said, "Obey my voice, listen to my commands." He didn't command them to make sacrifices in that way. Jeremiah 7:22. For I spake not unto your fathers, nor commanded them in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt concerning burnt offerings or sacrifices. 7:31. And they built the high places of Tophet, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I commanded them not, neither came it into my heart. So that is not how Yahuwah ordained his feast, to behave and make offerings and sacrifices in that way. He says that he hates and despises their feast, and they were pouring out offerings and burning incense to the Queen of Heaven. The star of Ashtaroth is actually an 8-pointed star and is often associated with Astarte, specifically as the star of Inanna or the star of Ishtar. And it makes me wonder if this could be connected to Jeroboam's 8th month, an 8-pointed star. He's not talking about the sanctioned 7-day Sabbath feast, but rather the attribution to the wrong deity in the 8th month, the false Sabbaths of Yom Kippur and Sukkot. Isaiah 14:12 says, "How you are fallen from heaven, O day star," which is the Latin word for Lucifer, Hillel in the Hebrew, "son of the dawn, how you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the star El. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north." In Hebrew literature, one star symbolizes their place and standing in the heavens, or of their nation. Here in Isaiah, recall how the king of Babylon is called Lucifer, the light bearer, who said in his heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the star El. It's interesting to note that the modern day state of Israel has one star, and yet USA has 50 stars. It's kind of telling, is it a jubilee or is it significant of many gods? In Acts 1:2, I showed in my last video that the authorship of Amos is written at the time of Jeroboam, king of Israel, and is mostly a rebuke towards the northern tribes of Israel, as we can see here in this context of Amos 1, during the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. In chapter 5, Amos draws on the example of the Exodus to accuse them of behaving the same way. Have ye offered unto me sacrifices and offerings in the wilderness 40 years, O house of Israel? No. The sacrifices and offerings were not made to Yahuwah, but to Malachims, kings of Canaan, who worshipped the king Baal and his queen consort Ashtaroth. That's the spiritual component. But the physical is coming into covenant with the nations. They would often barter their daughters in marriage covenants with the kings of the nations for power and position. Give their daughter unto the giants. If you haven't yet, check out my video on giants. Judges 3:5-6, and the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, Hittites, and Amorites, and Perizzites, and Hivites, and Jebusites. And they took their daughters to be their wives, and gave their daughters to their sons, and served their gods, their judges, their Elohim. In Amos 5, it says, Israel lifted up the Sukkot, the tent of Moloch in Kion, Remphan. They gave their daughters over and passed their seed, their descendants, to the Molochs, to the kings, to make covenants with them and their gods. We see in Numbers 25 that they entered the tents and entertained sexual perversion. In Numbers 24, Baalim prophesies about how goodly are the tents and tabernacles of Jacob, that his seed shall be many, that a star will rise out of Jacob, and that a scepter or a tribe shall rise out of Israel. In chapter 25, while they camped in Baal Peor, some were committing whoredom with the daughters of Moab, also called Midianites, making sacrifices to their gods, eating and bowing down to them. In Numbers 31, they're commanded to kill off the men of the Midianites and purify themselves on the third and seventh day. Numbers 25, 1 through 2, while Israel lived in Shittim, I guess that's the plural form of the people began to whore with the daughters of Moab. These invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. All connecting us back to their time in the wilderness that Amos is referencing. Now, when we read Psalms 106, it really gives us some good context to Amos and is all about the exodus from Egypt and their time in the wilderness. They changed the glory of Yah into that of a beast, verses 19 through 20. They made a calf in Horeb and worshipped a metal image. They exchanged the glory, the kabod, the dwelling, the honor of Yahuwah for the image of an ox that eats grass. If you look at 106 in the Brenton, 26 through 29, therefore he lifted up his hand against them, to overthrow them in the wilderness, to overthrow their seed also among the nations, and to scatter them in the lands. They joined themselves unto Baal Peor, and ate the sacrifices of the dead. Thus they provoked him to anger with their inventions, and the plague broke in upon them. Psalm 106, 36 through 39. And they served their graven images, and it became an offense to them. And they sacrificed their sons and their daughters to devils, and shed innocent blood, the blood of their sons and daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan. And the land was defiled with blood, and was polluted with their works, and they went whoring with their own devices, just like he made reference in Amos 5:26, which you made for yourselves. We can see that it was with those of Canaan in the context of Amos and the rebuke of their time in the wilderness that they were taking up the tents of and mixing with and amongst the nations and other kings. They partook in these practices, and Amos draws on that behavior of how the northern tribes of Israel were practicing in these sexual forms of perversion. Amos 2:7. Those who trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth and turn aside the way of the afflicted. A man and his father go in to the same girl, so that my holy name is profaned. They lay themselves down beside every altar on garments taken in pledge, and in the house of their Elohim they drink the wine of those who have been fined. So it's a different Elohim. They were involved in lewd acts of indecency, violating the commands of Leviticus 18. The northern tribes of Israel would eventually go into exile, though, and Jeroboam's practices abolished. However, Judah was not unscathed. Looking at Canaan background, we can see from our trusty source of Wikipedia that says Canaan, the etymology is uncertain. An early explanation derives the term from the Semitic root kaf nun, to be low, multiple, humble, subjugated. An alternative suggestion put forward by Ephraim derives from the term Hurrian Keanahu, reportedly referring to the color purple, so that Canaan or Phoenicia would be synonymous, land of purple, though some reject this idea. Either way, Canaan's root is kaf nun, the same as Kyun in Amos 5:26. The first wave of migration into Canaan, called the Gasulian culture, entered Canaan circa 4500. This is the start of Cana. And you can see this image here. The Gasulian star next to the star of Ishtar is an 8-pointed star, not a 6-pointed star. And I mentioned that Judah had been caught up in Baal worship, but those practices were squashed by Josiah, king of Judah, as we read about in 2 Kings 5:26. We fast forward to the time of Judah had also followed suit in idolatry, but in 2 Kings 23 we see that Josiah makes a new covenant and destroys the vessels made for Baal, for Ashtaroth, and for the planetary Mazaroth. The people agree to keep the Torah. 2 Kings 23, 5-6. And he put down the idolatrous priests whom the kings of Yehudah had ordained to burn incense in the high places in the cities of Yehudah, and in the places round about Jerusalem. Them also that burned incense unto Baal, to the sun, and to the moon, and to the constellations, the Mazalah, and to all the host of heaven. And he brought out the Asherah from the house of Yehudah without Jerusalem unto the brook of Kidron, and burned it to the brook of Kidron, and stamped it small to powder, and cast the powder thereof upon the graves of the children of the people. Verse 21, and the king commanded all the people, saying, Keep the Pesach unto Yahuwah Elohim, as it is written in the Sefer of the Covenant. So in verse 21, Josiah restored the Pesach covenant. All covenants, old and new, have the intent to obey the Father and keep the Torah. Are we to assume that Josiah and his company kept a false Saturday Sabbath, honoring Saturn, after destroying the priest and the idolatrous practice? Even during captivity, the faithful remnant, such as Daniel, didn't bow down to the ways of Babylon. Fast forward again to the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, who make a new covenant after the Babylonian exile to keep the Torah and Sabbaths holy. Nehemiah 9:22-24. And you gave them kingdoms and peoples, and allotted to them every corner, so they took possession of the land of Sihon, king of Heshbon, and the land of Og, king of Bashan. You multiplied their children as the stars of heaven, and you brought them into the land that you had their fathers to enter and possess. So the descendants went in and possessed the land, and you subdued before them the inhabitants of the land of the Canaanites, and gave them unto their hand, with their kings and the people of the land, that they might do with them as they would. Nehemiah 13:22. Then I commanded the Levites that they should purify themselves and come and guard the gates, to keep the Sabbath day holy. Remember this also in my favor, O my Elohim, and spare me according to the greatness of your steadfast love. Ezra 7:10. For Ezra had prepared his heart to seek the Torah of Yahweh, and to do it, and to teach in Yisrael commandments and judgments. At this time, they're bringing things back into order and properly keeping the feast and seventh-day Sabbaths. Fast forward again, during the times of the Maccabees, Israel was assaulted on the Sabbath. The priesthood was usurped, and they were commanded not to keep their law. However, many resisted, and agreements were made, and they kept the seventh-day Sabbath intact, but with restrictions, and eventually they did become under Roman authority. Fast forward again to the time of our Mashiach. We must ask ourselves, did the Messiah ever rebuke them for keeping the wrong Sabbath? If he did, why did he participate in their festivities and weekly Sabbaths on a consistent basis, as his manner was? He stood up to read from the Torah on the Jubilee, to release the captives, right? Luke 13:10, now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. The Pharisees were accusing him of doing unlawful things on the Sabbath, walking in the fields and healing people. He doesn't tell them that they have the wrong day, but he says that the Son of Man is the Lord of Sabbath, as we see in Mark 2:27 and 28. So if he's Lord of Sabbath, one would think that he would want to make it the right day if he had the wrong day. He and his disciples were all doing a 7-day Sabbath on Saturday. Rome called the 7-day Sabbath Saturday, not the other way around. The Roman Catholic Church changed the Sabbath to Sunday from Saturday, not from a Tuesday or a Wednesday or any other day. There is no evidence that the day we call Saturday today was ever changed all throughout antiquity, and is, as shown, is suspect that Kiyun even means Saturn at all. But even if it does, there's no indication to show that it's ever changed throughout recorded history. We saw how Stephen called Kiyun Remphan and was connecting the Rephaim of Canaan to their time in the wilderness. You can look at all the ancient cultures and linguistically see how the nations called the Seventh-day Sabbath like what Judah did. It all lines up. I'll put a bunch of multiple quotes on the screen for us to see how they were calling our modern day Saturday Sabbath Saturn way back when. I'm believing that this has blessed you. I pray that you will share this video for anyone who's out there condemning the Saturday Sabbath. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Love to hear from you. May Yah's mercy and rest be with you, and shalom. Amen.